Hey, Coffee Conversations with Greg J is on. Greetings. Man, there's so much going on in this world today. I was just looking through my phone as I was waiting and moving through the city, and just so many things are hitting us hard, man. I mean, the administration is off the chain with executive orders and tariff wars and you know, ban this, ban that. It's just a lot going on. I hope you're keeping balanced. I hope you're keeping safe in these days and time. A lot to really think about, and it's important for us to keep our spirit right and do some self-care as we navigate through this. I think for us as the Black community, it's important always on this program for us to reach back to Mother Africa and examine what's going on the continent, because we do believe in building bridges of music, arts, and culture with Africa. And in this day and time, I wanted to encourage everybody to reach your lens out to South Africa as we watch the Trump administration really go after that beautiful country. I want to remind you, you might remember we were free Mandela, free Mandela, free Mandela, massive movement towards helping our brothers and sisters in South Africa overcome apartheid. It just in so many different ways. Our government was pretty slow in standing up against South Africa, but certainly through the movement of the people, remember, divest, 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 we were able to support and contribute to the freedom fighters and to the freedom movement in South Africa. Now, fast forward 30 plus years, South Africa's got its growing pains. It's still one of the wealthiest nations on the continent. But there are steps, political action that come in the wake of liberation. Remember, it was an armed struggle. Mandela is freed, democracy is established, thus and so. Now we hear so much about the issue of land expropriation. And land expropriation, just like kind of a form of like reparations is what I think, and I want us to take this time today to examine that topic and, point to how Trump is saying, hey, he's going to give asylum to the Afrikaners because they're being oppressed by the Black government. And he's stopping funding to South Africa because they are expropriating the land from white farmers, thus and so. It is a complex issue. So today, I want to bring in my two good brothers, Pastor Kelvin Sauls. You know him. He's from South Africa, but he's all around a good guy doing the work of the Lord all around the world. Good morning.
Hey, man. Good to be here. Sawubona. Heita, how's it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Hey, and then joining us also is my other brother. I mean, he's been on most of his career, as long as I've known him. He's really he's an economic development expert, but he has turned that skill set into global missions and lived in a few countries, I think, around the continent, most recently the Congo, but he's got a definite sharp lens, sharp focus on what's happening on the continent. Paul Turner's here. Yes, sir.
Daddy.
Hey, what's happening? Oh, man. Brothers, thank you so much for coming. And I really want to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about, remind the brothers and sisters out there who may be watching this program of, back in the day, man, we were really marching for South Africa. I think people in Los Angeles will remember the big, ginormous celebration when President Mandela came to the LA Coliseum. I mean, it was a big deal. And now, I see in this present iteration of political shenanigans, South Africa we need to stand with our brothers and sisters in South Africa. I mean, it's essential. Don't forget what we did back in the day, and now we're needed again. And now it's a new generation. But for people who don't know Pastor Sauls, talk about a little bit about the issue of land expropriation and why that's such an important cultural topic in South African society.
Thanks so much, Greg, for being here. I know this is going to be the first of many conversations because it's so important that we break this down so that people can, understand it. We want to make it intellectually, spiritually, and politically possible for people. One cannot talk about the Land Expropriation Act without putting it into context of history. Now, this is very important because colonizers do not want to talk about history. The act signed by President Cyril Ramaphosa 30 years, right? Or in the 30th year, I should say, of democracy. It's not just about what happened, the last 30 years, but you really have to put it, into context in terms of what happened around colonization in South Africa, the dispossession, of land based on racial discrimination, and also, the forced removal, of South Africans, from their land. And so, even though this all, started, way in 1488, right, when the first Europeans, get shipwrecked, on the Cape of Storms, it was called then, around that, 1497, Vasco da Gama, showed up. And then, of course, later on, in the other year that we have to also remember is when Jan van Riebeck, shows up in 1652. So I mentioned those dates because context is so important. That's when dispossession started. Even though there were resistance, right? The indigenous people resisted both Vasco da Gama. The indigenous people resisted, all of them, in terms of that. But, all of that dispossession and the stealing of land, right, and the moving of people off their land now gets culminated, right? After now you've had Portuguese, English, Germans, coming, for, you see, the southern tip of the continent because of its, for excavation purposes. It all culminated then in the 1913 Land Act, where formally, 85%, you see, of, right, native South Africans gets then pushed legally, right, into 15%, of the land, right? So look at that now, 15% owning 85% of the land, 85%, right, being pushed, not even, owning or being able to lease, right, 15%, of the land. And from then, that gets then formalized in 1948 under apartheid through the Group Areas Act. Then that's when, township movements, you see, also get started, and all of that. But all of it, is about the dispossession of land, right? And so, so we're talking about how do we dismantle a fiefdom, right? How do you facilitate, negotiate with thieves, right? Colonizers, who've basically just taken the land, by way of how, descendants, of, right, settlers and colonizers then move, into the land. And so there was a first attempt, that didn't work. It was really summed up as, willing buyer, willing seller, where you have to negotiate with a thief how to get your property back, right? Which in so many ways really doesn't, make sense. That didn't fly. And so really, this act is basically, a reparations act. But the important thing about it is, it is about how to, in an equitable way, facilitate, right, the redistribution of land for public interest, right? Now, Paul, you all know, as a community developer, we here have the public domain, piece that take place where a government can take, land, and it, of course, it really disproportionately affected us as Black folk here in the U.S., right, by way of infrastructure. But that's really what it is. It's not just a willy-nilly, way of coming and taking, but really assessing what the need is. Because after 30 years of democracy, South Africa, while the wealthiest, is still the most, unequal and inequitable, society. And so this really was an act to right set that, you see, in terms of that, really to move us forward, beyond really the land and housing crisis, that we have, in South Africa, that has caused, just a lot of pain, a lot of destabilization of families, et cetera, in terms of that. So that's, in essence, what, the act, is. And I want to just read, some, elements, of it, so that folk can just kind of understand, how, all of this, connects, around it. So the Expropriation, Act, is to facilitate just and equitable, distribution, in the public interest. Very, very important. Okay. And then one can add to that, it means that expropriation may not be exercised unless the expropriating authority has, without success, attempted to reach an agreement with the owner. You see, in terms of that. So really, you have organizations such as AfriForum, aka the KKA, the KKK of South Africa, really engaging in deception, engaging in lies around how this will affect folk. And because MAGA here in the United States, for me as a South African, don't just means make America great again, but make apartheid great again, because you have some apartheid owning the president and owning the vice president, really just facilitating interpretation of this narrative, based on deception and denial, around what happened way back. You have the response that you're having, right now. Let me close by saying this.
Let me ask you right here, Pastor. So, when I have been in South Africa, and actually even Southern Africa, this subject, when I've sat with white folks, this subject is very emotional for white South Africans. Why is that? And is it, I remember a profound conversation I did have with one white South African in Cape Town, and he was sharing with, his family had been on their land for all these generations, his grandfather, his great-great-grandfather, he's African, he's saying, you know what I mean? And he, doesn't feel that he needed to give the land back. So it's very emotional. Why is that so emotional?
But let's just say that this has nothing to do with whether you're African or not. It has to do with land, right?
Okay, all right.
And the fact that it doesn't matter how many generations are on there, right? The land was stolen, right? Yeah. That's the same thing in the United States, which has not resolved its land issue, right? Because our Native American or indigenous sisters and brothers has not received that. We were moved onto townships and Bantustans, they were moved onto reservations. Okay, let's just be clear about that. And for folk that look like me, we were moved into ghettos, right? Of the plantation, you see, in terms of that. So while I can understand them being emotional from a human perspective, right? I think it's very important that we let the truth speak what it was, that it was thievery, it was dispossession, discrimination, dehumanization that took place, around us. And now we find ourselves, right, in a country where really, homelessness, houselessness, is so institutionalized, because of what happened all of these years with the combination in the 1913 Land Act, and then, of course, the Group Areas Act that was one of the pillars of apartheid, in 1948. So I understand the emotions, right? But it's about truth. And let me just say, it's fine, for them to be emotional, right? But can they imagine our ancestors, right, who were forcibly removed of their land around them? We're emotional too, you see, around this. But in the end, it is about, justice. It is about equity, and it is about, righting what was, wrong, what was done wrong and unjustly, in South Africa. And look, if somebody steals my car, I ain't coming to negotiate with you, especially if I know it's my car and I have proof that it's my car. You see, around that, I think, we should just, invite, right, our South Africans, who the descendants of settlers, really to come to terms with the truth. And let's, come to the table and negotiate this, in a way that can facilitate conciliation, because until we do that, brothers, we will never have authentic reconciliation.
Mm-hmm. All right, enter Elon Musk, Paul Turner. He's encouraging Trump to, hey, make asylum for the Afrikaners because they're being oppressed by the Black African government. He's encouraging Trump to withhold funding. Let's talk about the funding part there, because I know you're, familiar with how U.S. aid and all of that plays out on the continent. Does it make a difference that does it hit their pocketbook at all if America withholds funding?
Yes, it does, because I'll let Paul go first. Now,
no, I want to hear. Go ahead. You were go for it, Pastor.
No, Paul, let's bring in your voice and then I'll go after you.
Okay. No, very good. No, I just want to respond to what Pastor Sauls was saying with regards to the land reform. This is a diaspora challenge and it needs a diaspora response. We have land reform has been on the dockets for after the end of apartheid for many years. And so it's been long delayed, this issue of land reform in South Africa. But this whole thing of land reform is now coming to an apex because it's coinciding with a lot of land giveaway throughout sub-Saharan Africa to the Chinese and to the Arab nations who need land to grow food and other things. So the world is seeing, particularly those in the industrialized space, that, hey, Africa is probably the most fertile last place we can look to meet our needs as the population continues to grow. But at the same time, it's sub-Saharan Africa's population that's continuing to grow. I mean, the Congo is going to be, for example, one of the most populous. It's going to surpass Nigeria as the most populous country on the continent in the next 25 years. So South Africa is now grappling with this issue, as it's long been part of its plan from the beginning. Before Mandela was released, that land reform was one of the development plans for achieving democracy, economic development, and all the things they wanted to do with society. Land reform was always a part of that. So this should not be a surprise. So Elon Musk, who was raised in South Africa, whose family relocated to Canada because he didn't want to get conscripted into the army, apparently has learned the lessons of his youth and is trying to, like Pastor said, make apartheid great again in the United States. So we really have to, come up against that as we did before. Back in the 90s, you know, my church was, we were not pro-ANC, we were pro-PAC, Pan-African Congress. Pastor Sauls will tell you what their model was. I don't want to repeat it here because I know this is a nonviolent show, but it just goes to show the level of commitment that a lot of us had at that time. And I did my master's thesis in Southern Africa in the early 90s when Mandela had been released, but wasn't yet elected to the presidency yet. So at that time, there was a lot of jockeying around positions and a lot of violence that was happening throughout the country. I was at the mass action stay away in Durban during that time when there was leverage trying to be achieved on both sides. And we have to remember that it's always been about land. I mean, they even dispossessed Africans in South Africa to such an extent that they denied them citizenship and put them in Bantustans and said they needed to have passports in order to move around. That's how insidious the apartheid system was of just seizing property and taking of land. And as I said, this is a diaspora issue, and it is a diaspora because we've seen the same thing here. You know, I'm now in the United States dealing with the homelessness issue. You know, if you can affect change and end African American or Black homelessness, you end homelessness in the United States. Because again, that same principle around the denial of property and why our home ownership rates are much lower than everybody else's, and how our generational wealth is behind others is because of this denial of property, this to be owners of property and of homes. And so this is an opportunity for us to, again, look at our common interests, our common goals, and let's work together. Let's fight for our brothers and sisters in South Africa to get what's due to them as we fight against making apartheid great again here in the United States.
Well said. Well said. Thanks for that, Paul. I think I just want to add to that, you know.
Yes, I was going to ask you, Pastor, but as you do that, just go ahead too and take the time to explain to us, are the funds withheld hurting South Africa or no?
Yes, it is. It's not hurting South Africa, it's hurting the whole continent. And part of that is, you know, because, you know, Western hegemony and Western imperialism, you know, never moves people, you know, towards, you know, liberation. That's not the goal. The goal is to move people to dependence. In fact, in many, many ways, it's not even interdependence, you know, and that's why, you know, I mean, I love, you know, God rest his soul, you know, Ron Brown, right? You know, when he was Commerce Secretary and he tragically, you know, died in a plane crash, you know, his slogan that he used was trade, not aid, because for him, it was restoring the dignity, right? You know, and the sovereignty, you know, of those that we will connect with on the continent, you know, to be able, you know, to invite them into an equal partnership, into a relationship that affirms both sovereignty and dignity, right? But Western imperialism, you know, does not work, you know, like that. It's about how do we continue extraction by way of dispossession, disempowerment, and dependence. So USAID, though it has done a lot of good work, right? As you can see now, it has resulted in dependency. That's why, you know, the current administration is using it, you see, as leverage to negotiate by saying, if you don't do this, we're going to take this and that away. So yes, it's, you know, it's hurting. Yes, it's detrimental. I was in South Africa, you know, in January, you know, with one of my, you know, immersive experience, you know, teams, you know, from the United States, right? And so we saw, I mean, live, once that executive order was signed, one of our drivers, brothers, you know, that came to pick us up that morning, right, said his wife went to work this morning, right, for an agency that received USAID, and she was told, you need to go home because that funding was cut, and we need you to take an unpaid, a sabbatical for 90 days until we figure out what this, what this will do. And he said to us, I'm so glad I have you all here to be able to do business with, because that's what probably going to have to carry us through during these uncertain times until we see, things happening. So yes, it's hurting. Yes, it's painful. It has caused a lot of, layoffs, put a lot of families, at risk. But that's what dependency do. I think the opportunity in this crisis is for us to have more creative and courageous leaders to see how we can move, towards self-reliance, towards interdependence, towards self-sufficiency, you see, and see, how we can, step up to engage in trade and not just depend on aid.
Mm-hmm. But I would say one of the big impacts of that, though, is in the area of public health. I mean, we do see in that area where African locals and ministries of health within African governments are very responsive and very quick, but they need genuine partnership in order to bring those impacts to scale. We have the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. We have, not just USAID, but all these other things that we're doing. We have PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which made HIV no longer a death sentence on the continent. These were all done through the work of USAID and the United States government that went in and provided that, doing all types of health screenings and supporting all sorts of other responses to epidemics and pandemics throughout, and helping to alleviate a lot of diseases like guinea worm and others in Western Africa. This is the legacy of U.S. involvement in terms of global public health. And now we're out of WHO. We're not supporting the World Food Program. I can tell you that food security is a major issue on the continent. And when we're not providing, support for World Food Program or for our Foreign Agricultural Organization, the FAO, and all these other things to help supply food security throughout the continent, we at risk of having another famine like we did back in the 1980s in Ethiopia. And what were we doing before that? You said trade, not aid. One of the things the U.S. was involved in is a program called Feed the Future, and which is all about helping local African small-scale farmers, most of them women, to be able to produce food and have food security within their own borders, so they don't rely on imported foodstuffs coming from the United States or from other people in terms of aid, but being able to grow their own food, making sure they have the inputs and the tools and the mechanization and the training that's necessary for them to do that. And these were the types of activities that were happening. And USAID money passes through, 60% of the funds pass through faith-based organizations based in the United States. Most of the money that's spent in foreign aid, most of that money comes back to the United States, because we say you have to buy our products, you have to buy our equipment, you have to use our NGOs. And so all that money supports salaries and institutions back in the United States. It's not money that's given away to foreign governments at all. So that's where the people really need to, again, have that education. We know that foreign aid budget is less than 1% of the budget. And so, but in people's minds, they think it all goes to military and to foreign aid. And that's a perception that people who are opposed to the U.S. having this role in the world continue to foment. But yeah, it's going to have a tremendous impact. Withdrawing from the world through our institution, particularly in the healthcare area, could be very challenging. Because I can tell you, I recall my former boss and your mentor, Bishop Blake, back in the early 2000s, took on this issue about what was happening in South Africa during the AIDS pandemic, and met with President-elect George Bush about how important it is would it be for the United States to play an active role. And I wasn't there, but I heard from a firsthand account that George Bush turned to Bishop Blake and said, "Don't worry, I'm going to do Africa." And when he said, "I'm going to do Africa," that meant he created PEPFAR, which helped reduce the AIDS deaths more than half. Now, you have more HIV drugs available, more ACT testing and community outreach, and all of these things that help to reduce the spread of HIV and also help people with HIV be able to live productive lives without dying from AIDS. That is all gone now because they cut PEPFAR.
Yeah, because
I heard where Dr. Arikana Chiambori Kwao of the African Diaspora Development Institute was saying that USAID was a wolf in sheep's clothing. What do you think she means by that?
Well, just what I said, it was really, people come, genuinely to help, but there's always, there will always be political undertones. Because, in the end, the U.S. is an empire that seeks to dominate. Right. And so one has to be careful how you receive, help. I think that's, key, around that. And, I think what she also means by that is what I said earlier on is to cause dependence. Right. That might not be, I don't think that's necessarily those who do the work. That's not necessarily what they intend. Right. But we have to understand there are always political undertones, that are taking place, and why and how people, support what they, what they support, and so people were caught off guard by all these executive orders, and did not prepare, for that, a spirituality of mutuality is one that honors interdependence and does not promote dependence. You see, around that, and I think what the ambassador was saying is, eventually it became more creating dependence with a lot of political undertones, than it was, initially intended, which is, to facilitate, compassion and to enable, development with integrity based on what was needed, in those particular communities and countries.
It does sometimes promote what I call a donor mode of production, whereby if you take a small country that I was in, like Lesotho, which is surrounded by South Africa, it's all based upon what makes that city work, that country work, is the amount of foreign government aid that is in that place. It's not being, its economy it's not sufficiently reliant upon production of goods and services of the locals, but by what comes in outside.
Right.
And in that case, in Lesotho, even one of the major employers was a dam project to build 3 dams in the only African country that's used to a snowpack. And the idea was to take this water, and this was EU funded, so that they could take water from the melting snow of Lesotho and send it down to the Transvaal region of South Africa. And every educated person within Lesotho that had a degree was working for the project. It was an internal brain drain. That's what I called it. Because there was no other companies and institutions that could provide the salaries and the employment for folks in the country that had degrees.
Yeah.
Now, when the threat to withhold funding first came down, my WhatsApp was blowing up from my people over there in South Africa. We Africans are not taking it anymore. They are very indignant, as we all are, with all of these orders and Trump's conflagrations and everything. What are you hearing on the ground there in South Africa? What are the people saying? How do you see our brothers and sisters on that side? What do they need us to do? How can we help?
So I'm sorry. Okay, initially it was a gut punch because, again, my angel tells us if a person, tells you who they are, believe them, right? And this current president, mentioned all of what he was going to do. Of course, he had the playbook or the blueprint in, Project 2025 on how to implement this, now to execute it. And so initially it was just a gut punch because, a lot of people, just, didn't believe that it would happen, right? insult to injury is, when you give people a gut punch, just like with the tariffs, then you want to tell them how to respond, right? It's a bully beating you up and say, now this is how you need to respond to me, right? Don't overreact, and all of that stuff. But again, Africans, we are proud people. We take our sovereignty, our humanity, our dignity very, very serious. And basically there was a groundswell, saying that, that the U.S., who wanted to use, or he wants to use this, as leverage. We've been there, around what apartheid has done and what settlers, who showed up in South Africa, has done. And so we know what it's, how to resist, right? And in fact, now how to reimagine that resistance, right? For the last 30 years, we didn't have a perfect government, but thanks be to God, we had a democracy, right? Mm-hmm. With a Bill of Rights, you see. And so I think, people, basically, said we need to figure out ways, to resist within the context of what's happening, globally on one hand. On the other hand, the U.S. is not going to tell us, just like Nelson Mandela said, you're not going to determine who our friends are. That's very, very important. We're going to be friends who we choose to be friends with. You remember that interview with Ted Koppel that, that Nelson Mandela had in terms of that. And then I think the third piece, I think there are three things happening right now. Of course, the executive order that can only be dealt with, with what's happening, coming out of the White House. I think the other piece, that we have to, let folk know is that there is a bill that was introduced by a Representative Jackson, out of Texas. And Ronnie Jackson is his name. He's from the 13th district in Texas. He introduced, a U.S. South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act, of 2025, right? He introduced it at the beginning of the month. And that bill then, was basically supported by, Representative, James, from, I think he's from Michigan, around that. Now, that's going to be the challenging piece where I think we can jump on that, how we can challenge it and resist that, because the dynamics, this was introduced last year as well. It died, because of, leadership in both the House and the Senate. Now it's a whole different, ball game, and so I think what people can do right now is we can't do much about the executive order. What we can do is to see how we get to our, representatives, just like as I would do, with our Congresswoman Sydney Kamalaga Dove, and not just ask her to oppose it, but ask her to organize, right, opposition, for this, so we can connect with not just our California, reps, but reps, elsewhere in the House to see how we can, challenge this. I think that's going to be a key piece to get people, to contact, your House representative and ask them, to see how they can, challenge, this particular, bill that is, in, Congress right now.
For us, so we can put it in the chat and make sure that people know about it.
Right. It is. It was introduced on April the 3rd, and I'll give you the bill name. But while I'm looking for that, I'm going to let Paul, respond, and then when I come back, I can have that for you to put in the chat for folks.
All right.
No, just to say one final thing on this whole USAID and the devolvement of our government from any kind of genuine partnership with African nations. And that's what we're talking about. The only one person benefits from this, and that's Vladimir Putin. We can't forget that we have a president that is basically a Putin asset. And that is the only person who's going to benefit from U.S. devolvement, because remember, South Africa is also part of BRICS.
BRICS, yes.
It's not going to work. You know, Brazil, Russia, China, South Africa,
And India, yeah.
and India. So you will be replaced. And you know, be careful what you ask for. So those of us who, and yes, to a large extent, USAID was a Cold War tool, and it was an effective one because a lot of people on the continent or in South Africa will never meet Americans. When I was in the Congo, for example, no one ever met an American or thought they would meet an American until I showed up, and that's why presence is so important. This is why presence is so important, and the USAID, for all of its faults and for all of its, whether it's creates dependency or now it's starting to do more small business work. I was learning some of its lessons, but it is our presence in the world, and it's how people think about us when we're there to help, instead of being insensitive and indifferent to the lives of people around the world, and they respond to that. When we're there and our presence is felt. And that's why I think it's important for those of us who believe in democracy, who are globalists, who see ourselves as global citizens. Obviously, it comes from our faith that God loves the whole world and gave Jesus for it. Even though we believe that God has blessed America, but Jesus came back for the whole world, and so that's why we take an interest in the whole world. And so to see our government, which is supposed to represent us, which is supposed to be a democracy, a government of we the people, means that we have to really stand up and make our voices heard so we can put this ship back in the direction where we want to go, so it exemplifies our values, and not just of those who want to make apartheid great again, or who want to be isolationists, or who want to promote white supremacy of its own. And that's why they don't want to have genuine partnership and connections with Africa. But we have to stand up and say, no, this is, we want a different future for the world and for ourselves.
Trump says he wants to, give asylum to the Afrikaners because they're being oppressed by the Africans, the Black Africans in South Africa. Would you heard that, Paul? What'd you say? What was the first?
Let's do a trade. Let's do a trade. We'll send us there. You could have a white guy come there, and we'll go back there. I'll take that trade. That's what I initially thought. But it's not. You heard their responses. They don't want to.
Look, in all honesty, finally we'll be able to get them out. You see, we despite the hostility that they came with there and that they remain with there, we've always provided hospitality because we are people of Ubuntu, right? But if anybody wants to take them, hey, be our guest, in terms of that. But that's not the spirit of Ubuntu, right? But the spirit of Ubuntu is rooted in dignity and in humanity, right? And so, and that calls for, equitable, redistribution. You see, and I think that's very important. And you'll hear me use the term reconciliation, but also the root word of reconciliation is conciliation. That's what this, Expropriation Act is doing, is facilitating conciliation, because we will never have reconciliation. It's a false unity. After 30 years of democracy, we still have, inequities, and that's because this request for refugee status is grounded in white fragility, in white insecurity, is grounded in deception, in denial, right? And so I think we just have to, let's get to the bottom with truth, right? And let me be very clear. The fact that, this administration, right, wanted to do what they're doing, yet cutting out people from all other countries, you see, in terms of refugee status, in terms of, asylum and all of that, it just shows the racially biased, right, framework that they're using, around that. So what we're dealing with right now is basically administration that is governing by way of racism and greed. and all of its underlying, factors. That invitation is a racial invitation. It's a racial invitation from the descendants of settlers in the United States to the descendants of settlers in South Africa. That's what it is.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Listen, I want to get back on BRICS on our next episode. I definitely want to talk about that a little bit more and just examine the world markets. But I did want to note to you guys, I've been seeing on my WhatsApp and talking to my friends back in South Africa, the money markets are really now becoming really shady. It's almost 20 Rand to $1. And my friends are just like, holy crap, what's going on? And I do know that the United States does, manipulate markets and whatnot, especially on the continent. I've seen it in Ghana. I see what they did to Zimbabwe, made it, what's your thoughts on that?
Over land reform as well.
Just your headlines of it, because I want to go a little deeper the next time we come together on this whole economic piece.
Yeah. So, just to be clear with you, that, currency is new colonization. That's currency is a form of colonization. Why do I say that? Why is it that, all of the currencies of Europe and the West are stronger than the currencies of a continent, right? That can basically, that comprises geographically all of those, countries. So as far as I'm concerned, again, how the currencies are being manipulated, how it's being set up is a form of new colonization. And basically, truth be told, right? It is, colonizers taking care of their descendants. Right? Because now Europeans can travel all over the world, including Americans, right? And, and their currency is strong, you see, in terms of that. So yes, there's manipulation, but that manipulation is grounded in ongoing excavation, exploitation, and new forms of colonization.
Mm-hmm. Paul?
Now, I was going to say that just follows up to, again, why are you taking away all sorts of development assistance to the continents? Because you want to recolonize. And to the extent that, the rest of the world who also have their own agencies and institutions for partnership, it's just an opportunity for them to fill the void that the United States is leaving, and they will have those partnerships and the United States will not. And it will be a different world. This is an attempt to basically end globalization as we know it. So that, again, this is out of the fascist playbook, I think, because fascists don't like trade, right? Why would they? Well, they want to control what's within their borders. So when we talk about the borders, it's both sides. They want to close the border, but they also want to close it for those of us who are in. So, now they want to deport people who are citizens and send them down to El Salvador, all this crazy illegal stuff. And that's because they want absolute control within the borders of the United States. They don't want any influence coming in. And they're just trying to shut the door on us. And we're not going to do that. We want to say we want to be open. We want to be free. We want to travel. We want people to be able to come here. And this was a problem long before Trump. I can tell you that. In the Congo, if you got an invitation, if you were a pastor in the Congo, you got an invitation to come speak at a church in the United States, and they wrote a glowing letter, paid for it, everything, you could not get a visa. No, you cannot get a visa unless you have already traveled to Europe or the United States before. They were not giving out visas because the presumption is anybody who comes to the United States to visit for the first time will stay. Yeah. And you will have to bring all of your bank statements and all these other things to prove you have some reason to come back, or else they will never give you a visa.
Yeah, I remember when it was Congresswoman Karen Bass, that was
the most inhospitable place on the planet, but even before Trump.
I remember it was Congresswoman Karen Bass. That was one of her now Mayor Bass, of course, of LA, but when she was Congresswoman, I know that that was one of her main advocacies. She said, I heard her say that if an African applies for a U.S. visa, he or she will get denied.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, dang, like that, the United States is just not trying to have it, you know. Now,
Yeah.
Pastor Sauls and Paula, in our parting shots here, if you were um, speaking to the brothers and sisters here in America who may be saying, man, I ain't worried about no Africa. You know what I'm saying? I got my own problems over here in America. I don't know enough about it. What would you say to them? And then conversely, what would you say to our brothers and sisters in South Africa to just reaffirm to them that we are standing with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, a couple of things. One, for us to understand that MAGA is not restricted to, the borders of the United States. I am convinced, and we know this now, because Peter Thiel, who funded the senatorial, candidacy of, the vice president, and Elon Musk, who funded the presidential, candidacy of, of Trump, right? These are sons of apartheid. So the A in MAGA stands for apartheid, making apartheid great again. Understand there's now a confluence, a transnational confluence, right? You see, a transcontinental confluence of facilitating, basically apartheid, even here in the United States now. Mm-hmm. And one lens gets put on, which it has, because of how the campaign was run, Project 2025, and what we've seen has happened, especially as it relates to South Africa, is to just understand that this is administration that's trying to come for all of us, right? Malcolm X said, or Angela Davis, one of the two said, they'll come for you at night, and then it'll come for me, in the morning, right? It's a pendulum that is swinging here, and it's a pendulum that's swinging on both sides, of the Atlantic. You now can see that U.S. domestic policies towards Black people in the United States, right, has now converged with U.S. foreign policy towards Black countries, especially on the continent. So I think I would just invite people to really just put that into perspective and to understand that our struggle is inextricably connected. You see, as we now find ourselves at the intersection, of, what's going on in the United States, executive orders, and what's been introduced legislatively. But it is at this intersection. It's at this intersection, of marginalization, discrimination, that we can also, I believe, discover, our mutual and common, liberation as we stand on the bold and broad shoulders of our transnational ancestors, whether it's Harriet, whether it's Miriam Makeba, whether it's Kwame Nkrumah, whether it's MLK, whether it's Rosa Parks, whether it's Steve Biko, they all are there with us, and let's see how we can allow this pain to facilitate the path towards new possibilities.
Yeah, I'm reading. I know that Paul, earlier, Paul, hold on one second. Earlier, Paul, you mentioned the PAC, and I've been reading once again the biography of Robert Sobukwe, and I would amplify his name there also there. And man, the writings there are just really, really powerful. But Paul, go ahead and let us know.
No, I was going to say, we also need some wins and some victories, too, that we can get. And let's prop up the current effective leadership that we have on the continent and here now. For example, the new Namibian president, Dr. Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah,
Right.
she is standing up for her people and for her country, and and not taking the nonsense from the Trump administration. So I think that she's kicking the United Americans out who are looking to illegally mine minerals in that country. And that's what we need. And we need to promote that and let our folks on this side of the Atlantic see folks on that side of the Atlantic standing up. And then when we stand up, they stand up, and then we start working together in a spirit of resistance. And we start taking the ball and moving, and then we can take the ball and move down the field and start to achieve the things we want. So that's what it's going to have to take.
Just to add quickly, Ethiopia just created an aid fund, to basically, replace USAID, USAID, because, they are realizing we got to be able to respond, now natural disasters, et cetera, et cetera. There are countries in the Sahel region, Burkina Faso, Mali, who are standing up, around that. So Paul is absolutely right. Let us get to know and understand, those who are actually standing up, and see how we can stand with them. And then as we stand together, I believe, we can facilitate our common liberation.
So we should give that ambassador an award before they're kicked out too, for Namibia.
Oh my gosh! Hey, Greg, I have the name of that bill. I don't know whether it has been assigned a number yet. I was trying to look for it, but it's called the U.S. South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act of 2025. And I can send it to you, via text as well. Yeah. We can't hear you, Greg.
What are they trying to do with that bill? They want to investigate what we have done thus far and reverse it, or what's our?
It's a very broad sweeping bill, and maybe in our next episode we can kind of get into it.
Yeah.
It's a sweeping bill that is basically the reason why it has review, bilateral relations review, is let us review our relationship with South Africa. They also, of course, bring up there, our relationship, as we said earlier on, in BRICS, with India, Russia, as well as, China. Hey, if this administration would have relationships, with all those folk, including the bromance between Trump and Putin, so, I mean, what are you trying to tell us that we, I mean, that's just the hypocrisy here around that. But it also brings in, of course, South Africa's stance against the genocide and the acts of genocide, that the U.S., is supporting in Israel, and basically accusing South Africa of being anti-Israel. Around that, it quotes several, statements, that came out, around that. But I think maybe, in our next, time together, we can kind of go a little deeper and
Absolutely.
take it.
As we have noted, there's so much to dissect in this U.S. South Africa, novel, and we'll certainly take the time to examine the issues and contemplate them together while we inform and inspire our audience to think global. And that's what we really, really want to do. Thank you so much, my brothers. Thank you for coming in and chopping it up with Greg J. And, let's inform and inspire the people. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Thank you, Pastor Sauls. Thank you, Paul Turner.
For the courageous conversation. Paul, always good to hook up and hang out, and looking forward to doing it some more, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, y'all. All right. Coffee Conversations can be heard on Spreaker, Spreaker.com, as an audio podcast, Apple There's Google, there's Amazon, there's Spotify, there's wherever, iHeart, wherever you get your favorite podcast. You'll hear this, the audio version. You'll see this stream on YouTube. Like and subscribe so you can get notified whenever we publish a Coffee Conversations with Greg J. And we're on Beach City Radio, beachcityradio.com. And of course, Facebook and a number of different platforms. Just type in Coffee Conversations with Greg J, and you'll find us. Above all, everybody, just love one another. Keep your head up and love one another along the way. Peace and blessings. Yeah.